Good morning, church family. My name is Preston, I'm one of the pastors here, and it is one of the greatest joys in life to sing together with the saints. It is a sound of freedom for us to gather together and lift our voices to God in praise. And it's a foretaste of our deliverance. As Richard mentioned, we'll do that forever as we stand before God and sing His praises when He returns. That's what we get to talk about this morning. We're going to be continuing through Matthew 24 and 25 as we get to talk about the return of our King. So in the past century, there have been many technological innovations that have transformed our society. Radars and satellites are perhaps towards the top of the list of those with the most impact. So much so that in 1982, a whole TV network was launched called the Weather Channel to give us nonstop weather coverage so you can prepare for what is to come. Today you can reach in your pocket and you can find out the predicted forecast for the next few days down to 15-minute intervals. The technology has become so good that people feel confident chasing storms instead of running from them. Many of us have memories of watching Jim Cantore report on various storms live at the scene. And frankly, if you're like me, wondering how and why he gets paid to yell into a microphone about how hard it's raining when he's standing in the middle of a hurricane. But that's not what we're here to talk about today. I bring this up because people have always had a concern with when certain weather events will take place so that we can plan our lives around them. And now we have the ability to do that. A hurricane is predicted, and so we watch the radar so people in its path can make plans at the appropriate time. They know the storm's going to hit on Saturday, so they can go about life as usual until Wednesday, and then they board up their house and they flee to safety on Thursday in plenty of time. But how would it change if you lived at the beach and you were told that a hurricane was surely coming, but you didn't know when? What would you do in the delay? Certainly you wouldn't just go about life as usual and not have a bag packed or boards ready for the windows. You'd prepare differently than you would if you knew the day that the storm was coming. You'd have a different level of readiness, and you'd have your eye on the sky every day as you waited for its arrival. And Jesus makes the same point to his disciples in our passage today. The King is delayed in his coming, but are you ready for his return? Remember with me, he predicted the fall of the temple at the beginning of chapter 24, and his Jewish disciples assumed that he was predicting the end of the world. So they asked him, when will these things take place? They asked for a sign of his second coming. He spent the first part of his speech answering when the destruction of the temple would take place so that they could prepare. And verse 36 now begins with a transition word that shifts the focus. The Greek word the disciples used in verse 3 to ask about the coming is the word parousia, which was the word that they associated with Jesus' second coming. And it's the word Jesus uses again in verse 37 as he says, so will be the coming, or the parousia, of the Son of Man. And this is the day and the hour he refers to in verse 36. And it is the topic of the rest of his speech. But right away here we notice a difference. He's not going to give them a sign like he did for the temple. He's not going to tell them when. In fact, no one knows, he says, not even the angels of heaven, nor the Son, but the Father only. In a mysterious way, the fact that Jesus is fully human means that at that moment he didn't know the day of his own return. And we're not going to get into the weeds this morning of the interaction between Jesus' humanity and his deity. That's certainly an important conversation, but I want to focus on the main point of the passage this morning. Jesus is intentionally using wording here which would call to his disciples' mind Zechariah chapter 14, verse 7. It says it will be a unique day known only to the Lord, without day or night, but there will be light at evening. In this passage in Zechariah, he speaks of the triumphant return of the King, a return which results in the salvation of his people and the destruction of his enemies. Remember that the overarching main point of these chapters is that when the King returns, there will be judgment for those who reject him and salvation for those who accept him. So Jesus removes the emphasis from the question of when. And instead, in verses 38 to 44, he uses three different images to describe what it will be like. They don't need to know when, they just need to know that it's going to take place and what it will be like so they can prepare. Just like the hurricane, people use the time between now and the coming event differently when they know the day and the hour that it's coming. And so Jesus emphasizes that the time is unknown. An unknown time could be near or it could be far. His coming is delayed, but it could happen any time. It's never been a question of if he will return, only when. So someone look at your neighbor and say, Jesus is coming back. The emphasis is on the certainty there. If you believe his word, if you believe that he is coming back, then you will always be prepared so you won't be caught out when he comes. This is the point of the first set of three images that he gives. His return is unpredictable, but it is certain. So prepare accordingly. The first image is the story of Noah. God told the people of that day that judgment was coming. Those in the world didn't believe his word, and instead they went on living their best life, if you will. But Noah heeded the Lord's word, and he made preparation. The day came, and there was a sudden endpoint, and there was a separation. Those who listened to the Lord and had made preparation were saved, and those who didn't were caught out, and they were swept away. In the second image, in verses 40 through 42, Jesus again places the emphasis on an unknown time. People will be carrying about the ordinary tasks of life, like working in a field and grinding grain at a mill. And just like the first image of Noah, there will be a sudden endpoint, and there will be a separation. And the separation, he says in verse 42, will likewise be based on who stays awake, or who it is that's prepared. And if you follow the context of the passage, it would appear that those who aren't prepared are caught out and swept away, or as this image puts it, taken. For those of you who remember the Left Behind series, you'll probably be surprised that I just said you'd want to be left behind. But the immediate context of the verses beforehand suggests that those who are judged are the ones who are removed, and the ones who remain are the faithful. So we need to read the Bible carefully. We also should understand that when word pictures or parables are given, they shouldn't be pressed to mean more than they were intended to. I don't think Jesus is here trying to give a literal picture, but to use a relatable image to emphasize his point. There will be a delay. Life will go on as normal, but you can feel the suddenness of the end in this illustration, and you can feel a definitive separation between the prepared and the unprepared. He gives a third image in verses 43 through 44 of someone protecting their house from a thief in the night. The unknown hour of his return will be unexpected. It'll be a surprise. So just like a man who knows a thief is coming at some point in the night but doesn't know when, you need to stay awake as you wait so you can protect your house. It doesn't do any good to stay awake for just a little while and then to fall asleep. You must stay ready. This is the tension that Jesus wants his followers to feel. He wants us to be motivated by the fact that his return is imminent, this feeling that it's just around the corner, that it's likely to happen very soon. Jesus answers their question for a sign differently than they anticipated. He doesn't tell them when, but he does tell them that it's certain that he will return. His return is delayed, and he'll come when nobody expects. It'll be sudden, and there will be an irreversible separation between those who are ready and those who aren't. We don't have radars and satellites that can tell us when to board up that house. We don't have an app to use to track Jesus' return. We don't know the day or the hour. It is quite possible that it could be today. If the king were to return today, which side would you find yourself on? Would you be found ready? This morning, I hope to help you answer this simple question. The king is delayed, but are you ready for his return? After finishing verse 44, that's the question that we're left with. Are you ready for the king to show up? And so to help his disciples, including you and I, to answer that question, Jesus gives 3 different parables, and then he gives a description of the final judgment, the display of what it looks like to be prepared. Today, we're going to walk through the first 2 of those parables. Then we'll finish the section over the next sermon or two. The parables that Jesus gives are meant to provoke self-examination in his followers. Each one of these stories gives a sharp contrast in both the activity and in the fate of those who are ready and those who are not. And in each story, their fate rests on what they did with the time during the delay. But before we dive in, I want to emphasize to you it isn't the works themselves that decided their fate, but rather the works revealed the truth and the authenticity of who they really were. It isn't what they did that made them faithful, but rather their faithfulness is displayed in what they did. The proof is in the pudding, if you will. This is why those who are ready are commended. They weren't just hearers of the word, but doers of it, as James says. James 2:18 says, "Someone will say, 'You have faith and I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I will show you my faith by my works.'" A real faith in Jesus is a faith that acts. It's a faith that produces fruit. The first part of preparation for the King's return is hearing and believing the gospel. So if you're here with us this morning and you've never believed, listen in to me now. I plead with you first to prepare yourself for his return by believing the truth. The truth is this: we Christians aren't gathered together by a rule book or because we think we're better than everyone else. We're gathered because we realize that we were all sinners, lost in darkness and broken by our sin. We see that we rebelled against a good and gracious and holy King, and we couldn't do anything to make ourselves right with him. And yet this King, the very God of the universe, saw us in slavery to sin and gave up his very own life on the cross, bearing our punishment in our place so that our chains could be broken and we could be set free simply by believing in him. A heart that has true faith, true belief, a true understanding of that love and that loves that King in return will be displayed in a life poured out in obedience for his glory. Because we've been so graciously redeemed by the blood of Jesus our King, we strive by the power of the Holy Spirit to be servants that glorify and please our most generous Master so that he will be praised the way that he deserves. So in light of the gospel of Jesus, let's see what it looks like to live for his glory through faithful obedience as we wait for his return. As we walk through these parables, I'm going to pose a question that's brought out by the story. And my hope is that you'll spend some time even this week praying through these questions and letting the Spirit search your heart so that you're ready when the King returns. The first parable is known as the parable of the faithful or unfaithful servant. You'll see it in verses 45 to 51 of chapter 24. The question that we get from this parable is rather simple. Does your service reveal your faithfulness? In this story, which you heard John read, we see two main characters. We see a master and we see a servant. Jesus uses a sort of rhetorical question in verse 45 to set up two hypothetical, contrasting responses to a given responsibility. The master is going away and he gives the servant a task. And Jesus asks the question, how does the servant's response reveal him to be faithful or wicked? Notice in verses 46, 48, and 50, there's an emphasis again that echoes that of the previous section. The master's return is delayed and it's unpredictable. He'll come back at an unknown time. The servant's diligence to carry out the task he's given will reveal his heart. So look with me at what exactly it is the master expects while he's gone. Who then, Jesus says in verse 45, is the faithful and wise servant, whom his master has set over his household to give them their food at the proper time? What is the servant's responsibility here? He's told to serve the master's household by giving them their food. The master needs those who are in his care to be provided for while he's gone. It's not hard for us to imagine this scenario. Most of us have, at some point in our life, been asked to take care of something or of someone for somebody else. Maybe your parents went out of town and they entrusted the house to you. Maybe your friend has asked you to take care of their dog for the weekend. Or maybe you've babysat someone else's children for a night. They expect you to serve and to provide because they trust you. They've placed what they care for under your care and asked you to serve them by serving another in a certain way. The master here gives a huge responsibility to his servant. Serve and provide for my entire household, he says. Serve me by serving those who are mine. I can't help but hear Jesus saying to Peter, Peter, do you love me? Feed my sheep. If you want to serve me, Peter, take care of my people. You see, Jesus came not to be served, but to serve. He gave his life as a ransom for many so that many could be called his children. And then he ascended to heaven, and he entrusts his people to under-shepherds or pastors in particular, but also to each other, to love one another and to serve each other the way that he served us. And blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. The master wants to find his servant diligently serving others in his household when he returns. It's that simple. Notice the contrast between the blessed and the wicked. What does the wicked servant do during the delay? He says to himself, "My master is delayed," and begins to beat his fellow servants, and he eats and drinks with drunkards. The contrast in response here is that the wicked man takes the responsibility he's been given and uses it for his own gain and his own pleasure. He serves himself instead of serving others. We're servants by nature. We'll always be serving something. We're either serving God or serving ourselves and our passions. The wicked servant takes advantage of others instead of providing for them. He indulges his selfish passions, and he thinks only of the present moment. His unbelief that his master is returning leads him to maximizing his pleasure today and forgetting the task that he's been given. Notice the clear contrast here. The diligence of the faithful and the debauchery of the wicked. So, Christian, does your service reveal your faithfulness? Different answers to that question have quite different fates. The blessed servant in verse 46 and 47 is commended. The master gives a sort of beatitude here, a promise of blessing. Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all of his possessions. The faithfulness of the servant is highlighted with a gracious gift from the master. No longer is his position temporary, but he's promoted permanently and placed over all of his possessions. He's generously rewarded long-term for his short-term faithfulness in serving the master's house. But the fate of the wicked when the master returns suddenly is dramatically different. Verse 51 says he will cut him in pieces and put him with the hypocrites. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Jesus gives a quite shocking image that's meant to jolt the listener into a response, to catch our attention. There are severe consequences for being found unfaithful. I mean, listen to the weight of that. He will cut him in pieces. It isn't just a slap on the wrist, but being found in opposition to Jesus has serious eternal consequences. In Matthew's gospel, he frequently uses the phrase where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth to refer to eternal destruction in hell. Notice who he says is there in verse 51. This unfaithful servant will be put with the hypocrites. In his recounting of this parable, Luke uses the term unbelievers instead of hypocrites. But remember Matthew's Jewish audience here, in the context of the previous chapters. I don't think it's an accident that Matthew intentionally places the term hypocrites here. But I think it's particularly relevant to his meaning, and it's very important for us today in our context. In chapter 23, Jesus pronounced woes on the scribes and the Pharisees, calling them hypocrites repeatedly. He told them that the kingdom was being taken from them because they had been taking advantage of the people that God had entrusted to them. For centuries, they had taken advantage of others as they waited for the coming of the Messiah. And then they had finally rejected the true shepherd who would come into their midst. They had presumed to be on the inside because of their ethnicity and their pride in their own traditions. But they had failed to meet the master's expectations. And when he came, they weren't found giving the household their food at the proper time. So the Jews were being judged, and the temple was being torn down. The kingdom was being taken from them and given to those who would see Jesus by faith and become his people by trusting him and worshiping him. And so the warning here is the same for us as it was for the Jews. The old age has passed away and a new age has dawned. God has now entrusted his kingdom to the church, to us, his people. He's entrusted the kingdom to all of you who confess to be Christians. But growing up in a church or having membership in a church doesn't guarantee your ultimate salvation any more than being born a Jew guaranteed theirs. The way you serve and what you serve will ultimately reveal your true faithfulness. So when Jesus comes back, will you be found serving the household of God? Will you be found steadfast in holiness and diligent in the responsibility he's given us to care for one another? Or will you be found indulging your present passions and taking advantage of others in his household? Church, he's given each of you a task. What will your master find you doing when he returns? Now, this is a question for all of us to answer, but there's a particular warning here for those of us in leadership. God called the leaders of Israel to account in Ezekiel 34. It's the same kind of judgment Jesus has been pronouncing on the Pharisees in his day because of the way that they've led the people. Listen to this from Ezekiel 34. Prophesy and say to them, even to the shepherds, thus says the Lord God, ah, shepherds of Israel who have been feeding yourselves, should not shepherds feed the sheep? You eat the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, you slaughter the fat ones, but you do not feed the sheep. Verse 10, thus says the Lord God, behold, I am against the shepherds, and I will require my sheep at their hand and put a stop to their feeding the sheep. No longer shall the shepherds feed themselves. I will rescue my sheep from their mouths that they may not be food for them. God cares about his sheep. He's jealous for them, and he cares deeply about how the people who say they're shepherding his sheep actually tend to them. This is why the consequence is so severe for the unfaithful servant in the parable. That's why Jesus' woes on the Pharisees are so scathing, because Jesus identifies so closely with his people that he takes it personally how they're led. Remember, Jesus said to Peter after his resurrection, Peter, do you love me? The thing he tells Peter to do to show that love is what? Feed my sheep. Serve my household faithfully. If you want to live out the faithfulness that you're professing with your mouth, do it by serving my people. And so to those in leadership in our church, including myself, and to those aspiring to any sort of leadership, let me ask you this question. When the master returns, will you be found feeding his sheep? Or will you be found feeding yourself? Will you be found diligent in holiness, or will you be found using the church to serve the passions of your flesh? I fear the celebrity culture in American churches creates an environment that's dangerous for the flock. It attracts people who are seeking fame instead of faithfulness. People who have proven charisma but might have unproven character. And so when the temptations come, they take the food from the flock and feed themselves. That's why Matt and I have talked so much about having a culture in our church of confessing sin to one another and holding each other accountable in love. That's why we spend time regularly confessing sin to each other in our elders' meetings. That's why we want you to know the inside and out of our lives, because we're human beings who, except for the grace of God, could easily fall into unfaithfulness. And we know we need each other's help. It's one of my favorite things about serving alongside Matt, that I know I can say this confidently, that it's the deepest desire of both of our hearts as your pastors to be found serving you and feeding you when the Lord returns. This is why we'll continue to raise up other men who think and live the same way, who understand that leadership isn't about getting something for themselves. Because our church and other churches need more godly men whose service to the sheep will reveal the faithfulness of their hearts. So we ask that you pray for us. We ask that you pray that the Lord would raise up other faithful leaders among us. So church, this first parable leaves us all with the question, does your service reveal your faithfulness? The second parable Jesus gives here starts at the beginning of chapter 25. It's known as the parable of the 10 virgins. When you read both this parable and even the last one, it can be easy to search for a hidden meaning in all the little details. But many parables are using a narrative to emphasize a singular point. We need to keep in mind here that not all parables are allegories, meaning they don't all have details that correspond with some hidden meaning. Often the ones that do will be explained by Jesus to his disciples, so we aren't left trying to figure them out. So the best thing to do with parables is to read the whole story and take it in for what it is. Look at the main characters of the story. Observe the differences between the characters. And look for a sort of shocking or unexpected moment. Often that moment will reveal the whole point that's being conveyed in the story. So this second parable begs the question for us this morning, do you personally possess readiness? We're going to see in this story again how the delay of the bridegroom shows or reveals the difference between good and bad, or between wisdom and foolishness. So picture the scene with me as we walk through it. Verse 1 says, "Then the kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise." So we have 3 main groups of characters. 10 virgins split into 2 groups, 5 wise and 5 foolish, and then the bridegroom. We're not exactly sure some of the cultural roles surrounding the wedding party in those days, so we shouldn't assume that this is like a bridesmaid today. Weddings were different, often taking days, sometimes even a whole week. It's not really that important that we understand the nuances of the role to understand the story, but what is clear is that at some point throughout the wedding week, this group of virgins, as they're called, were supposed to lead the groom in a torchlight procession to the house for the marriage feast. So these 10 women go to fulfill their task, and in order to do so, they take their lamps. And their lamps would have been something like a bundle of cloth tied to a carrying stick and dipped in oil. The oil was the fuel for the fire, and a well-soaked lamp might burn for about 15 minutes. And so because of that, it was customary to take a jar of oil so they could re-dip the torch into the oil before relighting it. And one commentator said that a torch without a jar of oil was as useless as a modern-day flashlight without a battery. And certainly today, if you were going somewhere dark and it was important that you see, you'd take a set or 2 of backup batteries. So all 10 women take their lamps, but we're told immediately that there's a sharp distinction in the group. Half were foolish and half were wise. And verses 3 and 4 tell us why. "For when the foolish took their lamps, they took no oil with them, but the wise took flasks of oil with their lamps." You see, the foolish took a flashlight into the woods without spare batteries. This will become a key part of the story. So these women are all waiting around with their lamps, expecting the groom to show up. You just picture them checking their watches and waiting, tapping their feet, waiting, wondering if they put the time in their calendar wrong. They thought they knew when he would show up, but he was delayed, verse 5 tells us. And finally, the late night caught up with all of them, and every single one of them fell asleep. We're not really told why the bridegroom was delayed in coming. It doesn't necessarily matter why. All that matters is that a delay happened, and it affected their readiness for their role. Notice again here the continued emphasis on the unexpected time and the unpredictability of the return. At an hour they didn't expect, when they were least alert, at midnight, they're all equally startled as they're awakened by a shout. "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." And I don't know about you, but I would have woken up a little grumpy with my friend for showing up at midnight. But they didn't respond that way. They all respond to the shout by getting up and setting out to fulfill their role. They begin trimming their lamps, and now the moment comes to get the fire going. But the foolish virgins couldn't light their torches. You can just see them sitting there trying to light their torches in vain. You can feel the desperation. You can hear the button flicking back and forth on the flashlight, but seeing nothing but darkness. With each click growing more desperate, but all the while knowing deep down that they've been caught out. They hadn't brought their jars of oil. They presumed to know the time that he would show up, but he delayed, and they ran out of batteries. So they turned to the wise and asked them to share. And now the climactic moment. Will the preparation of the wise be enough to make up for the lack of readiness of the foolish? Unfortunately, they say, there isn't enough oil to go around. The foolish must go out and buy some for themselves. This is the shocking moment, the climax of the story. And so we want to zero in here because Jesus is delivering the point right here. The point isn't to make an ethical example. He's not saying if you find yourselves in the woods with a friend who runs out of batteries, don't share your extras. Rather, he's saying that spiritual readiness isn't something that someone else can provide for you. All were surprised at the coming of the groom, but only some were ready. And the story will finish here in a similar way to the first one, by showing again that the fate of those who possess their own readiness is very different from those who don't. While the foolish virgins were going to find oil, the bridegroom showed up. Verse 10 says, "Those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut." Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, Lord, Lord, open to us. But he answered, Truly I say to you, I do not know you. For those who were prepared, the bridegroom's coming meant joy. It meant that they could go inside to the feast, to celebrate and to enjoy his presence. But those who were unprepared were left out. Notice the contrast here, and notice the finality. There are those inside the door, and there are those outside the door. Just imagine here a solid, thick oak door banded with iron, the kind you'd see in a castle that takes all your weight to open and close it. The hinges creak when they swing, and it shuts with the sound of thunder. As it thumps closed, their fate is sealed. The echo of that sound in the halls is awe-inspiring to those on the inside, and it leaves in its wake a deafening silence to those on the outside. And indeed, in verse 12, the bridegroom reiterates to them firmly that this was the final verdict. Truly, I say to you, you were found unprepared. Despite their presumption that they should be included, they were left out. The delay revealed their lack of preparation. It revealed their false relationship. Their words and the response of the bridegroom echo Matthew chapter 7, verse 21 through 23. At the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then will I declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. The false disciples are left out in Matthew 7 the same way the foolish virgins are in Matthew 25. They presumed they had a role in the kingdom, but their preparation showed that they didn't actually know the king. It isn't that they didn't know his name, but they said, Lord, Lord. But they're turned away because they didn't actually know him. What does he mean by this? The emphasis in our passage this morning is on the fact that readiness can't be achieved at the last minute, and it can't be given by someone else. Those who claim to know Jesus can't presume that they can make last-minute adjustments to their lives when he's about to show up. Instead, Matthew says in verse 13 that the point is to watch for him because you don't know when that will be. There's a delay, but you must keep watch. There's an urgency for you to stay prepared. I'm not sure exactly where the quote came from, but I heard it from Yvonne, and though she's not here, I'll give her credit. You don't have to get ready if you stay ready. Jesus wants all of us to not have to get ready when he comes. He wants us to stay ready. He wants you to have oil for your lamp. He wants you to have batteries for your flashlight. The wise disciple isn't one who hears Jesus' words and just says, I'll deal with that later. The wise disciple is one who follows Jesus wholeheartedly, and so he can sleep soundly, knowing that he's ready to go into the wedding feast no matter when the Lord returns. I think there's an intentional link to the wording that Jesus uses here in this parable in Matthew 7. In Matthew 7, Jesus just finished preaching the Sermon on the Mount, teaching what it looks like to be a part of his kingdom. It looks like humility and meekness, and hungering and thirsting for righteousness, purity of heart. It looks like being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. It looks like entrusting our very righteousness not to our own external ability to keep the law and to show that off before others, but entrusting it to Jesus who fulfilled the law. Righteousness goes far deeper than we can fathom, and yet it's far more attainable than we can imagine. It's attainable because Jesus offers it freely to us. It's attainable because Jesus fulfilled every part of the law. He was perfectly humble, perfectly meek, perfectly pure, perfectly patient and honest, and he died on the cross, nailing our impurities to the cross and offering us a clean slate. When we truly encounter that love, that grace, that mercy, our response is to enter through the narrow gate and walk the narrow road, to produce good fruit. And at the end of Matthew 7, Jesus gives a contrast between the wise and the foolish, just as he does in the parable of the 10 virgins. The wise man is the one who hears his words and acts on them. It's that man who's built his house on the rock, and he's ready when the storm comes. The foolish man is the one who hears his words and doesn't act on them. That man builds his house on the sand, and he's caught out when the storm comes. So in order to stay ready, it means we hear the words of Jesus and we act on them. We build our life on them. We walk the narrow path to life. We don't walk the broad road and presume that we can just hop on over to the narrow path at the last minute. If you truly know Jesus, you'll seek to walk the narrow road. Not in order to earn his favor, but because of what your King has done for you to invite you into his kingdom. You'll seek to abide in his love and to produce fruit out of a heart that's consumed with loving him in return and bringing others into that love. He'll know you as you share in his sufferings as the world persecutes those who follow him. It doesn't mean you'll live a perfect life, but it means the aim of your heart is to hear his words and to do them. It means when you do mess up, you confess to him and humbly ask him to help you stay on the narrow path. If you sit in church week in and week out and nothing in your life ever changes, it should raise a question in your heart. And this is a particular challenge for those of us who've grown up in church or have been around church for a long time. And I want to bring this question directly to the children and the teenagers and the young adults in the room who have grown up in a Christian family. Are you presuming on someone else's preparation? Is there a temptation to think you're okay because your parents profess Christ? Teenagers in particular, but really all of us will be tempted to think that we can go out into the world and taste the broad road for a short period of time, and then you can get yourself straight and come back to Jesus. But be warned by this parable this morning. The Son of Man is coming at an hour you don't expect. So we're called to watch and stay ready. So do you hear the words of Jesus and seek to build your life on them? Or do you roll your eyes inwardly because you've heard it over and over again and you've grown numb to it all? Look at verses 10 through 13 and hear the door shut and feel the weight of that sound. There will be a day when the verdict is final and your preparation for his return will be revealed. Will you be on the inside or will you be left out? Church, the unexpected time of Jesus' certain return is meant to make us keep watch on our souls. So ask yourself, do you personally possess readiness? Throughout this whole section, Jesus is telling his disciples that they should expect his return to be delayed, but they were to be vigilant in their preparation. His imminent return demanded diligence in the task that he left them with. At the end of the book of Matthew, after Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, he commissions them to take his kingdom to the ends of the earth, to make disciples by teaching them to obey all that he's commanded. They had a job. They had a task that the king had entrusted to them. They needed to each be personally ready for it so that their service would reveal their faithfulness. In church, as disciples of Jesus, the exact same task has been passed down to us. The King has entrusted his kingdom and its advancement to us, so we should make sure our lives match our profession. When we ask ourselves these soul-searching questions, it can be a trick of the enemy to cause us to sit in guilt over our past failures, to think that we haven't been faithful or we haven't been prepared, and so we fall into despair. But church, I want to encourage you this morning that there's still time. Our Master is still delayed and he's gracious, but he won't delay forever. So today is the day. Now is the moment. If you know you're on the outside looking in, see the generosity of King Jesus to give his life for you and to invite you into his kingdom. Respond to his service to you by confessing him as Lord and Master and turn to follow and serve him today. We love nothing more than to help you do that. And if you're here this morning and you've confessed Jesus for a long time, but this morning you've been unsure of what the service of your life is revealing, or you've been unsure of your own preparation, don't let those questions linger. Hear the words of Jesus and build your life on them. Set your heart to follow him and to serve him by serving his church. There are many in our church who'd love to read the Bible with you and help you understand what it means to be a doer of the word in response to our loving King. I want you to be confidently ready when the Lord returns. And lastly, if you've been following Jesus wholeheartedly already, I want to encourage you to remain on the narrow path. The Master has promised he will return, and you will be rewarded. As we sung earlier, joy is coming. Persevere through the delay, because there will be a day that you will see him, and he will welcome you into the marriage feast. There will be a day where he will come and he will find you serving his household faithfully, and he will set you over all of his possessions. You will share in his glorious kingdom forever. The king's return will surprise us all. His return is delayed, but it is certain. He will show up and he will separate the faithful from the unfaithful, the prepared from the unprepared. How will he find you when he returns? Bow your head with me.